Hi guys, it's Rory here. Just wanted to leave a quick note to say that if you enjoyed last week's episode and want to keep up to date with the content that we release every week, please remember to follow or subscribe to us on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, or whichever platform you're listening to us on. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify specifically, please also remember to leave us a review. It means a lot to us and does wonders for pushing our podcast in front of new listeners every week. Once you've done that, leave a comment on Spotify or come and join us on X, BlueSky, or Instagram and let us know that you've left a review. It means a whole lot to us and we'll make sure that we get in touch with you to say thank you. Thank you once again for listening. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome back to the Football Heritage Podcast. I'm your host, Rory Bryce, and today I've got the pleasure of being joined by journalist, fan activist and PhD student Benjamin McFadyean. Benjamin, it's a pleasure to finally have you on the show. How are you today?
Hi Rory, how are you doing? Yeah, really good. Yeah, we got some sunshine down here. Dortmund beat Wolfsburg yesterday. Only 1-0, but they're still second in the table, only 2 points behind Bayern, and that's what counts.
Exactly. It's been a nice turnaround for Dortmund, I think, after what's been a few years of, I don't know if turmoil is the right word, but certainly struggle on the pitch. So, here's hoping that they can actually make a push for the title this year. And it's good that you got to enjoy your football this weekend. But as I said, I'm delighted to have you on the show. Today, we are going to be talking about fan friendships and what they mean to different football clubs and different football supporters around the world. And obviously, as usual, the heritage implications involved in fan friendships. I think really coming at it from this angle of football supporters and football ultras, especially those who travel to away games, are quite often perceived as being really tribalistic, really aggressive towards each other. So I really wanted to explore this concept that actually some ultras want to make friendships and build bridges with each other and interact with each other in different ways that are actually portrayed in the media. And this is something that Benjamin is, I suppose, experiences and deals with every single day because you are heavily involved with the London Borussia Dortmund Supporters Club.
Yep, Dortmund Fan Club London, that's right, exactly. Founded in 2013. Basically, we were the first English supporters club. There's now 9 fan clubs across the UK, one in Edinburgh. And it's been a long journey, but there's now a lot of Bundesliga on television in England, which is very gratefully received. And it's a great league. I really enjoy it. And yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a fantastic initiative. And as I said, that means that you will be experiencing this idea of building friendships with other fans, both individually and as part of a wider fan group every single day. It means that you have first-hand experience of it, and it means that it's something that you're quite well versed in, it, both in terms of connecting individual fans with the wider Dortmund community, but also building those friendships with other supporters groups that want to come and follow Dortmund. Just before we jump into things properly, Benjamin, tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, so basically my mum's Scottish from Perth. We moved to Germany when I was 12 years old, Dortmund exactly, and at the time I went to the British Army School, the Cornwall School in Dortmund, which might be familiar to some listeners. And basically it was a good time to be going to Dortmund because tickets were readily available, although the club were not that successful. They only really sort of hit a high note in 1989 when they won the DFB Pokal, beating Werder Bremen 4-1. Completely by surprise, with Karl-Heinz Riedler, who some players may remember being on the other side, in fact. Things sort of started going better for Dortmund from about 1992 onwards. But from my perspective, I was out there for 10 years approximately, and it was a great time and basically just got to know BVB, went to a lot of games over there. And when I moved back to London years later, I was obviously aware that the Red Dragons Bayern Munich fan club had started up. And I really felt like it was, something that was the thing to do, was to create a fan club for BVB fans, because a lot of people were starting to notice when Dortmund got to the Champions League final 2013 that they're a great club. The yellow wall is amazing, and people started wanting to go out to games. And I just felt like it's the right thing to do, start up a fan club. So the first thing we did was we organised a huge party for the Champions League final. And amazingly, our plan was to have something really huge. And amazingly, over 1,000 fans turned up. Most of them from Dortmund, and most of them had just come over without a ticket. But we actually were stopped from doing it because Ealing Council didn't want people to come over without tickets. And they said, if you organise an event, then people will just come over without tickets. So in the end, we had to organise it as a German beer and sausage tasting event and not a football party. And it was brilliant. And Euronews came down and filmed it, and we just had a brilliant time. Unfortunately, Dortmund lost the final, but the fan club has remained. And yeah, it's been good connecting people between Germany and England. And yeah, I feel like in a way that's kind of what I do now, is just connect people and bring people together and open up the world of Bundesliga for people in England so that people can see what a great league it is.
Yeah, it's a good time to be doing it as well. Like you said, there's a lot of German football on English and British television these days. So, strike while the iron's hot, while it's popular, while people are wanting to get involved and actively looking to take part in it. There's no better time to set up a fan group. Am I right in saying, Benjamin, that you've also studied this to some degree as well, this idea of different fan groups and fan friendships, these connections, becoming so prominent within football?
Well, my focus is on football governance, so 50+1 and similar. But I have, over the years, experienced the friendship between Hamburg fans and Dortmund fans, which unfortunately died some years back, but it was a very, very strong one for a long time. My focus is on the day-to-day reporting about Borussia Dortmund and day-to-day reporting about German football. So it's a phenomena which I come across a lot. And I've certainly got some insight on that, but it's not a key focus in terms of my studies. I did a master's degree in football in translation, German to English.
Okay.
That was my MA. I was translating the biography of the chief executive of Borussia Dortmund, Hans-Joachim Watzke. It's called Echte Liebe by Michael Horeni, into English. We're still looking for a publisher for that, by the way. But it's a great, insightful book into BVB. And yeah, it was really amazing to do the MA and then basically just look at what texts could be interesting. The next one I'm looking at is Gerd Muller's biography. Yeah, the focus has been basically, been my focus, is translating material, and yeah.
Nice one. Yeah, okay, so I see where your experience lies. The translating side of things could be quite an interesting topic of discussion as well. Obviously, earlier in the year, we released an episode with Christopher Hilland on, the language of football, the dialogue in football that we use. But for the moment, we're going to speak about fan friendships and the connections that we make as supporters, both as groups and individuals. And there's quite a lot of things that we could cover in this, but I suppose the best place to start would be to ask what we mean by fan friendship. So what in those two words is actually being conveyed whenever we mention them?
Well, from my experience in Germany, you will have seen this if you've been out for a game. A lot of the sort of hardcore fans wear these kind of cut-off jackets, cut-off jeans jackets, which they'll wear on top of another coat or a leather jacket or similar. Probably would be familiar to people who are into heavy metal or hard rock, the kind of concept of a cut-off, jeans jacket, basically. A lot of these times they'll adorn them with patches from clubs or, aspects of the culture of the football club that they love. I remember myself having one, and it would have things like clasped hands together of Hamburg and Dortmund, or Dortmund and Rot-Weiß Essen, Dortmund FC Cologne. Those are the main friendships of Borussia Dortmund, although the Ultras also have friendships with Saloniki, PAOK Saloniki, and a range of other clubs around the world. It's like a visible presence, something that would be worn to every single football match. It's called a Kutte in German. And the Kutten, the people who wear them, Kuttenträger in German, are basically looked up to in a way because they put their money where their mouth is. So that's a visible thing. Another thing that you'll see is banners in the stadium. So in Germany, a very big thing is if you go to a football match, your fan club will bring a banner with them. And so when we look at a German football game, we can see banners all around the stadium saying random things like, Glasgow BVB fan club. There is one, by the way. And I should say hi to Anton up there. Or it'll say, Tokyo BVB fan club and so on. So essentially that's the way that they're showing that they're at the game, and then basically all the other fans can see it. So it's very tribal in a way. I think that that's a very, very authentic way of expressing fan culture in Germany. That to me is really attractive, the fact that they really do have a language of their own, a culture of their own, a way of living. It's all about the team, but it's also about the experiences, the games that you've been to in the past, the people that you've met. I've got on my rucksack, I've got something sewed on there, a patch sewed on there for a small club in the 4th tier called Hessen Kassel. I'm invited to their derby in November against Kickers Offenbach, a fourth-tier derby. Now, you wouldn't necessarily expect a BVB fan to be going all the way out there to a fourth-tier game, but to me, it seems, it's just the old friendships that you met, people you met on the road, the beers that you've had, I think that's what football is about, and in many ways, it's kind of what's got lost in a way a bit in the British game. I think I can certainly speak for down here, down south. And I think that it's really important in a way that football is not just going to the theatre or the cinema, but it also has a language of its own, and it's a kind of a tribal expression of who you are as an individual and what your life is about. And as I said, the away trips are just as important as, well, they're very important, basically. The sacrifice that you make to follow your club is as important as anything else in football.
Yeah, I'd completely agree with you there, and there's quite a lot that we can unpack, quite a lot that you mentioned there, particularly towards the end. As football fans, we use football as a tribal expression of our identity, and I think the fact that we often travel to games is a huge part of that, whether you're following your club away or, in this instance, following another football club away from home as well. I mean, like you said, I think it's probably a little more prominent within Germany that fans of other clubs, especially those clubs that have friendships with each other, will go to each other's games in big matches sometimes, and it's quite common for then patches to be worn to show that you have been to see that club or that you're associated with that club, which is quite nice in a lot of ways. But again, it's about expressing identity and about expressions of self and what we perceive ourselves to be as football fans. So I think that's a really important point. When we talk about things like friendship, particularly between ultras groups as opposed to individuals, what do we really mean by friendship? Because as I said earlier, ultras groups are often perceived as being very tribal, very aggressive, defend their own patch. Maybe by the way that the media represents them sometimes, you wouldn't necessarily think that they would have friendships with each other, but they very much do. They're a very much active part of the ultra scene to have friendships with other groups of clubs. So what does a friendship between ultras groups actually entail?
Well, I think to some degree I would err on the side of caution, because the Dortmund Fan Club London has never been part of the ultra scene. In Dortmund on the Südtribüne, the South Stand, it's blocks 12 and 13, mainly 13, which is right in the middle of the yellow wall, which is a 26,000 standing area behind the goal, which I'm sure a lot of anyone listening will know in Dortmund. It's pretty famous. There are numbers of ultras groups called, for example, I'll just name a couple, Desperados, the Unity and similar. They are largely responsible for creating a lot of the atmosphere, in that they kind of marshal it, and they have the megaphones out, and Ollie Ricken, who's the main capo, if you like, is the guy who's kind of marshalling people and encouraging people to sing certain songs and similar. And I think that they are responsible for a lot of the discipline, the way that the Borussia Dortmund atmosphere is so incredibly intense, so incredibly coordinated. What they also do is they basically, and this I have been involved in, they also paint the choreographies. So the stunning, extraordinary choreographies that you see on the yellow wall, year after year, basically, are all hand-painted, and they basically go round and raise money and collect money from other fans. And the collections will often be done literally just before the game. So they have just guys out there rattling tins, basically, and you can contribute. So you really do feel like, oh my God, I've been part of this incredible choreography. And then they've also got a little, almost like a little office under the yellow wall, Südtribüne, which is called das Bütchen, and it's just like a little office basically where you can go, you can join up, and basically you can also contribute, and you pay an annual fee. I can't remember how much it is, like €12 or something, and then you can belong to something called the Koalition Südtribüne, which is basically a group of fans, individual fans and fan clubs, who are all joined up together, and they basically coordinate initiatives, to get the football club to change certain things. For example, Codex 09 was introduced a couple of seasons ago, actually, which is a set of values for the football club. And the football club themselves ended up actually signing up to it. So I think it's a set of 9 values, basically saying things like, you can't change the badge, you can't change the colours of the football club, you can't move from the Westfalenstadion, you can't leave Dortmund as a city, football ticket prices can only be increased by a certain amount. So you see certain things like that, and you think to yourself, wow, these guys really have influence on the club. And it's incredible to belong to that. So I'm not just a club member, I'm now celebrating my 10th year as a Borussia Dortmund fan card-holding member, but I'm also, as I said, a former season ticket holder. I had a season ticket till last season, and also part of that grouping. So whilst I'm not an ultra, I still have a good amount of influence. We get to go to the annual general meeting. Any major changes at the club, such as, for example, the introduction of women's football a couple of years ago. Now got a second women's football team. They've just drawn Bayern München in the DFB Pokal, the German FA Cup, which is amazing for Borussia Dortmund. The women's team are now in the third tier, just been promoted to the third tier, but they're playing Bayern, who are in the first tier. So that's their first really, really massive game. And so introducing the women's team, which was a new thing, or also introducing the handball division and so on, are all things which get voted on. And the fans get to vote on them. And we've got 248,000 members worldwide. When I started going to Dortmund in the early 90s, we were like about 20,000 members. So you get to see really that there is a thirst for being part of a living organism rather than just simply being a paying customer. And I think that when people really realize that about clubs like Borussia Dortmund, they are very attracted to it. So I think in many ways, people talk about BVB as the hipsters club. I think it's actually the thinking football fans club. You know, those who've really thought things through and really looked at it and who really want a taste of good old fashioned football the way it always was before the big corporations moved in. That's my view.
Yeah, I think the governance side of things has a huge thing to do with that as well. I mean, as you said, the fans get to vote on so much. Being able to submit those sort of 5 core elements of what a football club should be, like that's protecting the club's identity. That's protecting what the club is. It's protecting their symbolism by including things like the badge, their place, by protecting the stadium. It's not something that you see across the world very often, if at all, and almost kind of solely is a German football thing. But I mean, it's obviously brilliant and I'm a huge supporter of it, but it's incredible that those fans have been able to do it. Are they able to vote on things like fan friendships as well, like what fan groups to bring into the fold, so to speak?
That's something which the football club themselves don't really get involved in. So what Borussia Dortmund, for example, I'm just taking them as an example, although I write about the Bundesliga in general. So the football clubs focus themselves will be on carrying out friendly matches locally in the area around Dortmund every summer, so that basically the local people who live around the area get exposure to the first team of Borussia Dortmund. And I think, again, that's a really, really welcome thing. And it does happen to a minor extent here in Britain, I think, too. But I see that as something that's really, really declining. Clubs like Liverpool, Man United, etc., Celtic, they'd rather go out and play in Las Vegas or Adelaide or Sydney or whatever. And I think that the fact that German clubs still go and play local teams, local village teams and so on in the summer break is a really, really important thing. And so regarding the friendships are very much something the club does not get involved with. The ultras definitely have a strong influence. The head of strategy in the club is actually one of the founders of one of the key ultra groups, which I'll just leave unnamed, but his name is Yanni. And so he basically has a direct influence on culture and heritage within Borussia Dortmund. He actually made a really good film about the club, which is called Am Borsigsplatz geboren. So the friendships are very much things that the fans themselves organize. And many of them are, as I said, last very, very many, many years. And what do they involve? Well, I guess that's something we can explore in the programme.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's really what I want to dive into next. I think it's fascinating as well that clubs and different supporters groups have people who are so involved with culture and heritage, because it just gives it so much more importance. It's recognising what these things mean to a football club. And when your own football club sometimes doesn't do that, particularly speaking from a Scottish perspective, then it's just great to see that acknowledgement being given to something that I feel is inherent to any football club and any supporter. You know, you need to recognise your heritage. You need to know what that is. You need to know why you support who you support. Like I mentioned in one of our other episodes this year, Who's Your Club, which explored why we support football clubs. Basically, what myself and the guest, Ryan Foley, agreed at the time was, if you want to be able to call yourself a supporter of a football club, one of the things you need to be able to do is know the history and know the heritage and know where the club comes from. So I think that's massively important. But I think just to go back to the fan friendship side of things, why is it that certain supporters groups become friends? Is it just a case of recognising the importance of alliance, or is it also an acknowledgement that different supporters share the same values as you, and therefore you want to ally with them in a way that speaks to something a little bit bigger than just the tribalism of, for example, Borussia Dortmund?
Well, I've never been involved in the founding of a fan friendship. And I think that, as you said, that a lot of the time that is the ultras who will organize something like that. And I'd like to differentiate between ultras and hooligans, because that's not necessarily the same thing. And I hope you'd agree with me.
100%, yeah.
Yeah. So the ultras are responsible a lot of the atmosphere, the choreography, creating the noise, getting the songs going and so on. And in the case of Dortmund, and I think also Celtic, really, really impressive the way they achieve that. And I think that's something that British fans, when they go out there, they're just so overwhelmed by the incredible atmosphere of the games. And I think Crystal Palace, for example, in England, they're trying to do something similar. And, the more atmosphere we have in the grounds, the better. And the more self-expression as fans, the more expression that, it's also our game. We saw during COVID and the pandemic what football is like when there aren't any fans. I mean, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, exactly, 100%. I think it's important, but I suppose the thing is as well in terms of fan friendships is that a lot of them do predate COVID as well, and I think the different fan friendships across the world have different dynamics depending on where you go. I mean, I would say it's probably quite a common misconception, for example, that Celtic have formal friendships with Bohemians from Dublin and Wrexham from Wales, obviously play in England because of the perceived shared values between the club. And again, I don't speak for Celtic Ultras. I'm not a member of any Ultras group, so I could be completely wrong with this. But from my perspective as just a regular match-going fan, I've not seen anything from Celtic fans to suggest that there is any kind of formal friendship in place. Again, formal being the key word there. I appreciate that there is a lot of shared values between those three sets of Ultras groups and maybe by extension football clubs, but it's interesting how there is a lot of perceptions around fan friendships as well that ultimately aren't the case.
Yeah, well, I remember very well, just briefly touching on Celtic, in the 1980s when Murdo MacLeod, some people may remember him, played for Borussia Dortmund, and later we had Paul Lambert as well. I remember very well that the Celtic fans were very well received, and a lot of that centred around the fact that Murdo, who had been a huge player at Celtic, at least a very well-loved one, I think, that kind of united the two clubs. But then, of course, to some degree, Borussia Dortmund were founded at the Dreifaltigkeitskirche, which is the Holy Trinity Church, and they came out of the Catholic community there. So again, there's a kind of a connection, if you like, a bit between Celtic and Dortmund and Liverpool to some degree. And then there's another thing, which is the shared, I hope I've got this right, Rory, you can correct me if I'm wrong, the shared "you never walk alone." Certainly between Dortmund and Liverpool. I think you might have it at Celtic too, am I right?
Yes, I'd say there probably is that element. I think what's interesting for me is that I'm trying to think of when Celtic and Dortmund have actually played each other.
They've played 3 times, most recently in the Champions League. Last season, it was a bit of a painful day for you.
It was. That's why I've probably forgotten about it. Yes, yes.
This is the true fan.
Yes, I mean, I'd say that probably because of those shared connection things, like you'd mentioned, then there probably is a little bit of certainly value sharing in there anyway. And this is the thing, coming back to this idea of formal connections. While there might not be a formal fan friendship in that respect, there is always going to be mutual ground, which I think is, it kind of creates more of a welcoming atmosphere for some supporters. So while there might not be a formal fan friendship, there might just be an unwritten rule that, these guys are okay, we are their friends sort of thing. And again, I think it's just part of Ultras culture, isn't it, as well? It's nothing is always necessarily supposed to be formal.
Well, very interesting is, for example, the friendship that Liverpool fans have with Dortmund, which came about largely because of players like Karl-Heinz Riedler, who was shared by both clubs, but mainly because of Jurgen Klopp, obviously, who's a legend at both clubs. When Liverpool fans, when we played each other 2014, we, the London fan club, played a friendly match against the London Liverpool fan club, the Reds, which is run by Soki. We played a friendly football match. And then 55 of us travelled up on the coach up to Anfield with the Liverpool fans, and we watched the game in the Kop, which is the Liverpool end, with our yellow and black scarves on. So whilst there isn't a formal friendship between Dortmund and Liverpool, it just goes to show how much warmth and respect there is between the two football clubs.
That's a really good example, actually. I really like that. It's not often that football fans are able to do that, and I think you're right that it speaks to the warmth of those clubs, that they're actually able to experience football like that with each other. In a space that is normally reserved for just Liverpool fans and hardcore Liverpool fans, I think that's quite poignant and quite powerful in its own right. In terms of actual fan friendships, I mean, some examples that I can think of from Scotland, I mean, Rangers and HSV.
Hamburg, yeah.
Probably one of the most well-known ones, not necessarily for all the right reasons, I would add. I think there's certainly quite a lot of animosity there, especially, with Celtic, obviously, and St. Pauli, although the Celtic-St. Pauli friendship doesn't seem to exist anymore. Certainly not in the traditional way that it has, but you also have fan friendships, and these are like some of my favourites. Hibs and Cork City.
Nice.
Of course, that goes back to the history of football in Cork, where you had two opposing teams in the 70s and 80s, Cork Celtic and Cork Hibs. Kilmarnock and FCK as well, which is one that I didn't know about until very recently.
Kaiserslautern. Well, Kaiserslautern in the southwest of Germany are a sleeping giant, if you like. They're in the second tier. I've been to the Betzenberg, and it's a phenomenal stadium. It's up on a hill above the city. Got a tour of the stadium, and I also got a tour of the dugout and the changing rooms, and also the museum. And I can only speak warmly about them. They're called the Roten Teufel, the Red Devils of Betzenberg. And they were a massive club in the 1950s and 60s. They had a player called Fritz Walter, who was a huge Germany international. And they've won the title, if I'm not mistaken, 4 times. And the DFB-Pokal, the cup, several times. So basically, they are a very, very, very huge club. And I think it's really worth emphasizing that I think it was 1988 when Kaiserslautern came up under the coach Otto Rehhagel, some may remember, won the European Championship with Greece. He took Kaiserslautern up from the second division and won the Deutsche Meisterschaft, the first tier championship. They went straight up from the second and won the title. And I think that's literally unheard of. I don't know if many clubs have achieved that.
No, it's a magnificent achievement. They're a huge club. Very historic.
Very historic football club, Kaiserslautern. And as you said, that the fans there have a fan friendship with the Killy fans, which has endured for many years.
Do you know where the friendship between Kilmarnock fans and FC Kaiserslautern actually comes from, Benjamin? Because it's one that maybe a lot of certainly more casual fans, and certainly myself, to be fair, within Scotland would look at and say, well, where does that come from? What's the link between those two clubs? Of course, it could just be a European adventure. Sometimes that is just often the case, and I suspect it to be so. But I just wondered if you knew any more about where that came from.
In my awareness, most of these will come from an early match in the European Cup in the 1970s. And I think that in the case of Kaiserslautern and Kilmarnock, it was a European Cup qualifying game. Then basically there were fans that went. You may remember that this summer, Rot-Weiss Essen fans travelled to Hibernian, to Easter Road, which I've been to
recreate their match in the European Cup.
Exactly, and likewise, Erzgebirge Aue fans went over to Northern Ireland. Incredible. So yeah, this is where the friendships often will come from between the European clubs. And in respect of how they come about in Germany, I'd like to talk a bit about that because a lot of them are quite strategic and historical as well. So for example, VfL Bochum, who are separated from Dortmund by just 13 kilometers, they have a friendship with Bayern München. And it's not hard to see that if Dortmund, their neighbours, are a massive club playing for the title every season, that having a friendship with the biggest club in the country, and in Dortmund the most hated club apart from Schalke, is going to be an obvious one. So going on to Schalke, then Schalke has a friendship with 1. FC Nürnberg, their club. Both of those teams were absolutely massive in the 1930s, 40s and 50s. That's in a way where they kind of got their roots from, of that connection. And those games will be very much celebrated. So not only will the fans come together beforehand to have beers together, but on the stands as well. For example, Dortmund's friendship with FC Cologne, which is a relatively new one. In my opinion, it's only about 20, 25 years old. I remember very well the rivalry between Dortmund and Cologne in the 1980s, and we got crushed by them almost every season. Cologne, having been a very massive club, kind of lost their way a bit, but that friendship is still very much celebrated. You'll see stickers with both crests on them. You'll see banners going up, and I myself have actually been in the Köln-Müngersdorfer Stadion and in the Cologne end with a Borussia Dortmund shirt on, and again been totally welcome. So those are just some examples. So a lot of them are strategic, a lot of them are based on local rivalries, a lot of them are historical. And a lot of the European ones come out of having played each other in European games and just simply wanting to maintain those ties.
Yeah, it's really fascinating stuff. Of course, you obviously had last year, Euro 2024, the friendship that kind of developed between Scotland fans and the city of Cologne, which is brilliant. Obviously, just a bit different to what we are talking about because it involves a national team, but it's still quite an important one because I think, Scotland fans made a really good impression on a lot of people from Cologne that day. So it's interesting to know that it can also kind of cross national boundaries in that way as well. And in this same way, one of my favourites is that Stenhousemuir, a club who are currently in Scotland's third tier, League One, they have a stand called the Norway Stand. Now, for a club who are a community-centred club, effectively based in what is a suburb of a suburb, to have a Norwegian supporters club, to me was incredibly interesting. And I always wondered why that was. And it's because, and it comes back to etymology, which I've spoken about in this podcast before, etymology, which is the study of place names, where places get their names from, etc. And Stenhousemuir in Old Scots, or, kind of going back to Old Brittonic, effectively means it's Stonehouse Moor, or the moor where a stone house was.
Nice.
And the word in Norway means the exact same thing as it does in Scotland. And because of that, that's why they've recognised Stenhousemuir, and that's why they've developed this kind of fan friendship with them and established a Norwegian supporters club. Really, really fascinating stuff.
Nice. Yeah, absolutely incredible. And I know that certainly a number of Scottish clubs do have fans because of there have been Norwegian players that have played in the SPL over the years as well.
Very true, yeah. You dig down into the reasons why these friendships exist. And I think what's quite important as well is that sometimes there doesn't always have to be a deeper meaning. Sometimes it can just be something as simple as, a language thing. Or like you said, being strategic if there's a club that you want to go and see who you were a former rival of or something like that, and your club's a little bit lower down the divisions and don't play them often. So I think, though, what is kind of stuck out for me is that these fan friendships seem to be a lot more prominent within the Bundesliga. And you've kind of laid out some of the reasons why, but I wondered if there was any other historical or social context behind that you haven't already mentioned.
Well, I mean, I think that, at the end of the day, there is also the fighting element, which I'm kind of trying to skive round and not really kind of emphasize. But this weekend, there was a big fight in Dortmund, which involved Rot-Weiss Essen fans, Rot-Weiss Essen, a third-tier club, fighting alongside Dortmund fans against Schalke fans. And they met up outside of Dortmund, and had a big old ding-dong. And unfortunately, that is also part of the culture as well. They call it the dritte Halbzeit, the third half of the game, basically. And so traditionally, that has also played a role. And the Dortmund fan friendship between BVB and Hamburg actually broke down because the Hamburg fans are reported to not have come to support Dortmund fans in a big fight against Schalke fans. Apparently, the Hamburg fans are reported to have basically ducked out of it. And the Dortmund fans basically lost and felt very, sore about it. And that's how the friendship broke down. But again, these are not things that I specialise in or have had any first-hand experience of. But I do think that there is an element, obviously, traditionally in football, of being a culture which can turn into more than a rivalry, if you like. It can actually become a physical rivalry. And again, a lot of that is about basically supporting each other, having each other's back, helping each other, and so on. Over the years, what I've observed personally, for example, the Champions League final 2013, was that, for example, the PAOK fans from Greece, Salonika, they actually got tickets from the Ultras for the Champions League final. Now, that, in a way, for them is very welcome, and it very much cements the friendship. But in terms of other fans, sometimes it can also cause resentments as well, because people will say, why are PAOK fans here and why are the tickets given to Dortmund fans? So in some ways, sometimes those fan friendships and particularly the influence that they have can also be controversial. If you look, for example, at the Portuguese game, the Ultras organizations actually get tickets from the football club and then sell them on to the fans. I don't know what a proportion of tickets it is, but basically they're getting a certain amount of tickets each year, and that funds the whole activities of the Ultras, including choreographies and banners and other things. So in many ways, sometimes the relationship between Ultras and football clubs can be too tight. And in many ways, sometimes the activities of the ultras are sometimes not always, let's say, done in the right way. Sometimes it could involve just selling tickets, or sometimes it can also involve organised violence. And I think in some ways, the English game, probably the Scottish too, is better off for the fact that we have less violence. But on the other hand, we also have lost a lot of the culture and the very heart of what we love about football, which is also the fact that, not just letting your hair down, but also being able to really express your love, your affinity and your relationship with the football club, and including all the trips that you've been on and the fan friendships and the friendships you've made along the way, the beers that you've had together, things like what the London Reds and us Dortmund London fan club had together when we played the friendly match and then travelled up to the quarter-final. The fact that we lost the game didn't really change the atmosphere. I mean, we were still onside at the end and still celebrating. But again, I think that's one of the beautiful things about Borussia Dortmund fans, is that they're always along for the ride, and they're not just glory hunting or trophy hunting, and they'll keep supporting the club even when we're doing badly. You still get a massive number of people coming to the games. Dortmund's average is 80,000, which is just incredible. And that's an average that doesn't go down. Doesn't really matter. I mean, Klopp's last season, 2015, we were right down there. At Christmas, we were second to bottom from the league, and the fans still kept coming. And so I think it's that loyalty and that love, that a lot of that is also fostered by the ultras, and, it brings people together. But above all, what they do is coordinate and make sure that the atmosphere is really, really lively, no matter what. And I think that is something very, very special. So we're going off a bit from the topic of the fan friendships, but I'm just trying to express that it's about so very much more being, let's say, a really dedicated and loyal fan.
Yes, no, I completely agree with you. I think within fan friendships, everyone always kind of snaps to that idea of ultras being friends. But I think what you're mentioning is that there can be other fan friendships, and other fan friendships do exist. I mean, even for myself, like through doing this podcast, friends with Borussia Sport fans now. A club that even a year ago I didn't know existed, which is class. Like, I love things like that. I love how football can bring people together in this way. But I think the experience that you have of actually connecting people is much more important than this idea of it just being a kind of tribalistic fight, or having to make these camps who are always in opposition to each other based on shared values. It can be so much more. And for individual fans, this is why it's important, why fan friendships are important, because if you're a fan of a club, but maybe, for example, you stay quite far away, or within your community, you don't go on the supporters bus, so you're always going to the games yourself. Whereas all of a sudden, because of this friendship and this connection, you now have a place to go where you can watch another football club, but still be a supporter of your own. All that makes sense, but I think that kind of sums up quite nicely what a fan friendship could be, particularly in the positive sense.
Do you know what? The traditional friendship of Liverpool has been, as far as I know, has been with Rangers, I think. But it hasn't stopped them having a warm friendship with the Dortmund fans on an informal basis. So as you say, it doesn't always have to be a formal relationship. Sometimes it just comes out of the moment. I remember a couple of years back when Dortmund won the FIFA Best of Football Awards for best fans in the world. It was for our common rendition of You Never Walk Alone before the game between Liverpool fans and Dortmund fans. And it's just such an electric thing when the fans are singing that song together. And because of the 96, we were commemorating that. And so the Dortmund fans, I was actually there at the event at the time, handed the trophy over to Liverpool. It went back to Anfield with the Liverpool delegation, although we won it as a joint award. I thought that was just a really honourable thing to do. And I think that people forget, that the working man has a certain honour and respect as well. And a lot of that is, how can I express this? There's a language and an honour and a real sort of, respect between working people. Dortmund came out of the coal mining industry, coal and steel. And in a coal mine, I've been in a coal mine, people have to have each other's backs.
Yes.
And I think a lot of these values come out of real working class values. And again, I think the working class values are something to be celebrated. In a world where honour and respect have been lost a lot, it's really valuable, the fact that people still celebrate them in football. I remember interviewing Martin Kreh, who was a great player at Borussia Dortmund, a defender, and also at Bochum, I should say, although he only ever made Germany under-21s international. And he told me that when they played in the semi-final of the European Cup at the time, the fans at Old Trafford in spite of losing against Dortmund in the semi-final, big game, clapped and applauded the Borussia Dortmund team. And he said to him that was one of the most poignant and important moments of his career, because it just got to show that people respected the nobility of the fight, the fact that Dortmund team had played so well and had beaten their local team. And again, I think these are really important values. And I think this is kind of what people are expressing in a way, is that, life is about more than winning. Life is also about taking part.
This is true.
Yeah. And so I think that, in football, there should always be a space for people to be able to express their values and their beliefs and what they're comfortable with and what they basically want to, get across. And that's what a lot of maintaining these fan friendships is about. It's about certain individuals just constantly reaching out, keeping in touch. And over the years, sometimes, the fan friendships will also develop into players, basically coming in from other clubs, where we've got a fan friendship. There's been a number of FC Cologne players that have played at Dortmund and vice versa. And that again cements the relationship. So Kevin Grosskreutz is a perfect example of that. He basically came straight from the Südtribüne, from the fan scene, from the ultra scene, and became a legend on the pitch at Borussia Dortmund. And again, I think, local boys, local lads, players that have grown up in the area, or even going to the matches on the South Stand, really important for us fans, players that we can identify with, players that we know from our local area. And again, in a time of corporate takeovers, football clubs, what could be better than a local legend, a guy like Steve Bull at Wolverhampton Wanderers, one club legends who only ever played for their local team and were born and raised in the local area. I mean, again, I think that's something that really goes to the heart of it. So football is about much more than just the points on the pitch. It's also about fans, about fan friendships, about humanity, shared values, shared experiences, and the sacrifice that we all make to follow our club.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It's that's a really good point as well, actually, the player side of things. I mean, obviously, the influx of Japanese players that Ange Postecoglou brought to Celtic 4 years ago now, it's done so much for the club over in Japan. The amount of people who now follow the club from Japan as well, just because of that, it is quite poignant, and it's very powerful when you just look at it, kind of in that way. And I think what's important for me as well is that in a sport that is quite often perceived and spoken about by the media and other people as if it is just tribalistic, it's important to look at these fan friendships and remember that actually football fans are a lot more intelligent. The networks that they create are done for a very specific reason. But actually there's a lot of positivity, a lot of community surrounding it as well, and it can actually be very, very beneficial for a lot of people and places.
I definitely agree with you.
Yeah, it's been a really, really good chat, Benjamin. I think there's quite a lot more that we could have brought out of this. And is there anything that you want to add just before we finish up for today?
Well, I think what's come out of it basically is that fans do count. The initiatives of individuals in society do count. That football is about much more than just buying your ticket and sitting down quietly. It's also about the songs, about the anthems, about the humour, about the local legends. And as I said, I mean, we've seen two beautiful examples of fan friendships this summer. And in a time of, quite tense international politics, I think it's really beautiful that we saw, the Erzgebirge Aue fans going over to Northern Ireland to celebrate something that happened, several generations ago, or the wonderful atmosphere at Easter Road between the Essen fans and the Hibernian fans, Hibs fans. And likewise, we're really looking forward again in the Champions League to the Spurs and Tottenham Hotspurs and Arsenal games. And, maybe a friendship will exist between us after that, We will see what comes out of it. But again, we've always been warmly welcomed at Tottenham, and we'll see how it goes, basically. So, yeah, I think international matches are the absolute cherry on the top, and it's just super exciting. And I know for one that Celtic fans will always be welcome at the Westfalenstadion.
That's good to know. Yeah, I think what's important for me speaking about this is that I guess that people can remember that football fans aren't just there to have fights and have a rammy. We create these friendships for really specific reasons, and a lot of them are to do with community. A lot of them are to do with wanting to find more from football, I think. Wanting to get more out of a game that is increasingly becoming commercialised. and just really wanting to reconnect with what I would think anyway is the kind of soul of football, which is connecting with each other, connecting with different people, meeting different people, travelling, and giving yourselves new footballing experiences that you might not otherwise have because you've kind of pigeonholed yourself into this kind of tribal narrative.
And I think that at the end of the day, society is made up of individuals, and it's not just always might that's right. It's also, as the old adage goes, there's nothing more powerful than an idea that has found its time, And I think that's a really important thing, is that every individual counts, and how you live your fandom is just as important as whether you bought the latest shirt, or even if you haven't had the money to buy the latest shirt. It's just about being there and what you do and what you contribute. And I think fan culture is here to stay and has to be here to stay. And I think these fan friendships between clubs are so very important in bringing about friendship and understanding. And that's what Borussia Dortmund London has been about, getting people over to the Bundesliga, getting people over to the Westfalenstadion, and likewise helping former players to come over and watch games when they want to. And, I'm just organising some tickets for a former player who was a great legend to watch a Manchester City game right now. So it just goes to show, at the end of the day, it's all about friendship. It's all about understanding. And I think, that was what was so dangerous about the European Super League. It would have disenfranchised the entire elite football from the rest of the pyramid. And isn't it beautiful, the fact that, there is a football pyramid that goes right down to the roots, that even your Sunday league kickers can basically dream of one day doing a Jamie Vardy and going all the way up to the Premier League? I mean, isn't that what football is about? I really think we just need to remember, in terms of heritage, that we're all part of this story. We're all creating it together. And, I really hope that that's what's come out of the podcast, is that it's our game. It's all of our game. Every single person, no matter who you are, no matter how much money you have.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to end the episode, and I think that's a really good point as well, Benjamin. It's our game, and I think as much as there's all this talk about, feeling powerless within these kind of modern structures within football and the disenfranchisement from the highest levels of the game, I think it's important to remember that there are things that you can do to enrich your football experience and give yourself something that's a little bit different maybe to what you're normally used to. And I think going out, travelling, making those connections, networking and building fan friendships with other football supporters and supporters of other clubs is massively important.
Absolutely spot on, mate.
Yeah. No, it's been a really good chat, Benjamin, and I appreciate you coming on. I know that you're a very busy person, so it's good that we've finally been able to have this chat. Of course, thank you very much to all of our listeners once again for tuning in. If there's any questions that you have about this episode, or if you want to suggest a topic yourself, you can DM us on X, that's @_footyheritage, or you can also email us at hello@footballheritage.co.uk. That'll do us for this week. Benjamin, say goodbye.
Cheers, mate. Thanks very much. And check out our podcast, the Dortmund Fan Club London podcast. It's on all major platforms, including Spotify.
Oh, yes, absolutely. We'll put links in our show notes to all of the things you've mentioned in this episode. But it's goodbye from me as well. We'll see you all again next week. Goodbye.